Hello everyone and welcome to the English Department's presentation on some SAT practice for all of you as you're getting ready to prepare for your exam. The SAT is going to be administered in the spring of this year, and there are just a couple of things that we'd like to talk about today and then get you actively practicing so that you can put your best foot forward when you take this exam. As you know already from taking the PSAT, the SAT exam is comprised of evidence-based reading and writing, along with mathematics, and an optional essay response. A typical SAT exam is 3 hours long, and the essay portion is optional. So I have listed here for you the fact that it's not a mandatory test, this section. So when we're talking about the 3 hours, we're really talking about 3 hours that you're spending on the reading section, the writing section, and the mathematics section. What does it look like? Okay, the reading portion consists of 65 minutes in length and 52 questions. Approximately, when you're breaking it down, it's somewhere around 5 total passages. And within those passages, there's usually a pair of passages as well. If you're doing the math in this part, you would probably assume that each passage probably has somewhere around 10 or 11 questions attached to it. You have over an hour for it, for reading and interpreting those 5 passages. The second portion of the English exam is the writing and language portion. That is something that we'll talk about on another day, but just in case you want to know for your own edification, that portion of the test is 35 minutes and it's 44 questions, and it's based on paragraphs where certain sentences are underlined, and you have to figure out if this is the best way to phrase it, or if there's a grammatical error, could you choose a different way of phrasing it? You do the same thing with organizing the paragraphs there. This section right here is not necessarily going to be generated by you writing a topic or writing in response to a topic. It's strictly the use of language. How well is it grammatically constructed? Is there subject-verb agreement, pronoun antecedent agreement? Is the verb tense consistent? All of those things that you've been learning throughout your stay at Kellenberg will come into play here. And then, as I mentioned to you before, the essay portion, which is optional, requires you to read a passage and then discuss how the author has built his or her argument. How have they been successful in trying to persuade their audience? What do they use for evidence? What do they use for reasoning? What kind of stylistic devices do they use, and persuasive devices? But for our purposes today, our concentration is going to be on the reading passages. Of course, there's no substitute for being a reader. If you are, you have a leg up on all the competition. If you're not, I would strongly suggest that you start putting a book in your hands now. Begin by reading anything you can get your hands on, whether it's a young adult book or you're reading your assignments for your classes. You're doing the chapters and actually going through them instead of just skipping to the questions at the end. You are paying attention and reading with Lord of the Flies, and you're not just getting spark notes. Read, 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 read. Just like any skill, the more you do it, the better you'll become at it. The reading portion of the SAT is basically asking you, how well do you read and how well do you interpret what you've read? For material that you might see in college and material that you'll see later on in your possible career. So it's all about being able to understand evidence. Can you have command of the evidence of something? The passages can run the spectrum. There's always going to be one passage that is literary based. It could be from American literature. It could be from world literature. For example, one of the samples that we're going to do today will be based on a novel that comes from a Japanese tradition. There have been American literary pieces, short stories, and novel excerpts. I remember one year an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge was on there. if you remember that from sophomore year. If any of you read Ethan Frome, there was a selection on Ethan Frome one year, but there's always going to be a literature section. There will also be passages on history and social studies. Founding Fathers documents, excerpts from the Gettysburg Address or from the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, or the Great Global Conversation. What do we mean by that? We mean, in particular, the world view of topics like freedom or human dignity or justice. Passages in this category could come from political science, law, education, economics, psychology, sociology, you name it. In this section and in the third section, there will often be graphs and charts and tables that have to be interpreted. So it's not just paragraphs and sentences, but you'll also have to be doing some interpretive work with regard to graphs and tables and charts. And the third type of question, of course, comes from the science world, whether it's bio or botany or chemistry or physics or earth science or environmental science. So those are the kinds of passages that you're going to see within the 5 that you get. There's always going to be a literature, and there's always going to be either a U.S. founding document or the Great Global Conversation. Okay, what are the purposes of the passages? Some of them are just simply to tell a story. That's often what you find with the literature-based ones. Sometimes it could be to make an argument, as you will see in the history and the science ones. Sometimes it will be to explain a particular study or a consensus or an experiment. And the levels can range from 9th grade level all the way up to collegiate level in terms of their intensity with their context and the way in which they're written. There are questions that are going to be relatively straightforward based on information and ideas. What is the passage saying directly to you? Then you get a little more challenging as you go down the line. Questions about rhetoric. Rhetoric is language. So how does the author use language to convey his or her meaning? And then probably the most challenging of all is synthesis. This is where you come in. You have to kind of draw conclusions, make connections, i.e. synthesize what you've read. Sometimes it could be between 2 related passages, because there's often a pair of passages together, or it could be between the passage and a particular graphic. Now, the only way to succeed on this part of the exam is to read. And this is something that we've moved away from. So I'm going to share with you this particular passage, and I would recommend that you always, always, always read the little blurb before the passage. Okay, that's most important, because very often you're going to find out some clues as to what's going on in the passage just by virtue of the fact that you pay attention to the blurb. There are different recommendations with regard to how to attack reading passages. Some recommendations, even on Khan Academy, said read the first paragraph, the last paragraph, and then skim the middle paragraphs. You could try to look at the questions first and then come back and do the reading of the passage. I don't know. I've tried a lot of different techniques myself, and I remember a long time ago when I was in high school, trying those other things didn't work for me. I needed to read the passage and then digest it and then go through my questions. But you can try a lot of different tactics, and that's what these little lessons are for. Today you might want to try the one where you skim the questions first and then you do the passage. Or you might try to do that one where you read the first and last paragraphs and skim the ones in between. I'm not a proponent of those approaches, but of course, do what's most comfortable for you. Right now, though, we're going to send you off on your own. We're going to ask you to read this passage. You notice that if you read the blurb, this is one of those examples that come from literature. And you'll see that it's not excessively long. Typically, they're between 5 passages. Answer the 10 questions, try a tactic, and see if it works. And then we'll tune in again to find out how to get the responses. Okay, guys, so here we are again. Hopefully you were able to go through this passage and you were able to answer the questions as best as you could. I would imagine that it was a challenging one for you probably because of the context in which it was written. We're talking about a situation where the setting is 1920 and we're in Japan. And some of us may have gotten stuck on some of the character names, you know. You have to understand that what they're doing is they're testing your ability to stay focused and to command the evidence. Really, that's what it is, a command of the evidence here. So we have a story going on, and we have an interaction between a young man named Akira and a woman, a mother named Shi. And essentially, what is he doing? He's come to ask permission to marry her daughter. Now, technically, there's been something going on between Naomi and Akira for quite some time, but the mother, Chi, has certainly not paid any attention to it. We can tell from some of the particular references here that, who really pays attention to their children when they're using or talking so hurriedly and so earnestly. That's how she viewed him as a child. That's how she viewed her. She doesn't even think that Naomi is reading paragraph here. As you can tell, Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. We're going to be asked about this word directly. And notice the comma and the description afterwards, breaking all tradition. So he's doing something that's out of order. He's doing something that's not necessarily the accepted protocol. And he's wondering about it. Was that it? And you kind of have to have the voice in your head as you're reading, because otherwise you can stumble over the words. And in this next sentence, it's most important to understand the dash and the fact that the sentence begins with had. Had he followed form, dash, pause. Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between, within that dash, we understand what he was saying there, that if he had only followed tradition, would she have been more receptive? Would she have? Well, we don't know. But here's what I would suggest. Every time you finish your reading passage, particularly the literary one, make sure you know what happened. Make sure you know that this is a situation of courtship. This is a young man asking for a young girl's hand in marriage, and he's struggling with the fact that he's when he says he came directly, breaking all tradition. It's a little small for my vision, but if we look at certain passages here, like around here, the fact that he bowed, right, somewhere around line, 26, and he's very deferential to a certain degree. That's somewhere around 34. Let me see. What else do we have? He calls her Madame in line 31, right? This is not somebody who's coming up to her with disrespect in any way, shape, or form, but he does in terms of the passage. And it says here, had he followed form, the prior sentence says tradition, 100 and 750 words. This passage is 2 columns plus 1 other column, and then 10 questions follow. Read this passage for marriage or anything of that nature. They haven't even started looking for a husband. But in the 1920s, there was a particular protocol or decorum that was involved with regard to courtship and marriage. And even in the open, they're breaking the rules by doing so. So our very first question is one of those sort of overview questions. Which choice best describes what happens? And that's what I meant when I said after you're finished reading something, digest it. Try to understand, what happened, essentially. And so hopefully when you're going through the answer for these, you selected B. Okay, you have this young man asking for permission to marry the daughter Naomi, and the request was totally surprising to Chi. You can see that in one of the earlier lines when it's, I think she says she had no idea this request was coming. Question number 2 is asking us about the developmental pattern of the passage. In other words, what we're doing here is we're taking a look at how an author uses language to develop his or her point or situation. What is the development here? What do we have? Well, out of your choices here, I'm really hoping that you have chosen letter B. It's a detailed depiction of a very meaningful encounter. It can't be a careful analysis of the traditional practice because he just poo-pooed it in the first paragraph. And there's no real series of questions. And I don't think you would call this an amusing anecdote or story. It's not really amusing. It's perplexing, to say the least, but it's not really amusing. It involves his attempt to get approval, right? There's descriptions of the setting. It's a winter night, it's cold, there's rain, and his eyes are shining with sincerity and, all this other kind of stuff. Okay, let's keep moving. Sometimes, as they do here, and they will numerous times in this section, they will refer to specific lines. Please go back and look carefully at those lines. This is a vocabulary and context. Just because you think you know the vocabulary word, guys, don't jump to the answer. Because the word directly could mean a lot of those things. But we have to look at the vocabulary word in the context of this excerpt. And if you're looking at it in the context of this excerpt, and you remember that opening paragraph, and we know that tradition was what was in those dashes, then we would answer letter C. He didn't hire a go-between. He came face to face to Naomi's mother. Okay, moving right along. Which reaction does Akira most fear from she? He is very worried that his request is going to be thought of as unacceptable. That she's going to look, letter A, at his proposal as being inappropriate. And why would he think this? Because he didn't follow the tradition. He didn't use the go-between. He even says, somewhere around line 63, don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I should have pointed this out. In question number 4, and I will try to state it me. I go back. So this is your assignment. Let's keep going. Well, what we have spilling into number 5 is what we call those double down questions. Okay, so if you answer this, then what's your proof for it? And so this is a problematic kind of question because if you get the first one wrong, you're going to back it up with the wrong evidence. So really take care when you're answering these double down questions, because if you get, in this case, number 4 correctly, that he's very concerned that she will find his marriage proposal inappropriate, then out of all those line choices, it's pretty clear that it's lines 63 to 64 that support that, because that's where he says, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. So those double downs can be tough. All right, so just make sure that you're following along with those carefully and answer the first one right, then the second one becomes a piece of cake. In this passage, Akira addresses Chi with blank. This is again about language. How does he talk to her? Well, how does he behave? We have to pull this answer from word choices. And we go back into word choices, and if you forget confidently, his plan, his decision, what he wants. So there is a level of respect here, but he's not going to grovel. You know what grovel means? You're not going to beg at somebody's feet, Like Macbeth says, I will not kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. I'm not going to sit there and, make myself a sycophant, but Akira is very respectful nonetheless. Okay, so let's move on to number 7. Very often there's going to be a main idea question or a main purpose. And if you've done what I asked you to do at the very beginning, where you kind of digest the passage and come up with an idea of what it's all about, then I think you would have no problem in answering this one. Because in that opening paragraph when he says, had he followed tradition, would he have had the same reaction from Chi? So this is a character, Akira, who is analyzing the reaction of what he hopes to be his future mother-in-law, wondering if he did the right thing. Again, a very specific line choice, line 2. So we go back to line 2, and we're asking about the definition of the word form. Remember, the word can mean almost anything that's on any of these choices, but we have to look at it in terms of context. Where I look for the best synonym for tradition, and if you answered B, you were correct. Okay, guys? 2 more to go, but hopefully you're doing well. Now, why does Akira say his meeting with Chi is a matter of urgency? This is a factual question. We know that urgency means he's got to rush. There's no time to wait, so to speak. And we get the answer to this somewhere around lines 41 and 42 when he starts talking about the fact that he has a chance, he has an opportunity to go to America, to be a dentist to the Seattle Japanese community there, right? So this courtship has become much more urgent for him, because he's got to figure out whether he's going to take Naomi with him, or whether he's going to stay here with Naomi, or he's going to have to make a home for her in Japan and hope to bring her at some particular point. This answer, he has been offered an attractive job in another country, is obviously the correct one. And again, this is one of those double down questions. So if you get this one right, you have a really good shot at getting this one right. And of course, he develops this whole concept in lines 39 to 42. He clarifies that the matter of urgency is in fact that chance to go to America, to be the dentist. And he needs Chi's answer to his marriage proposal so that he could decide whether or not to accept that job in Seattle. So there you have it. There's no substitute for doing the work on your own, guys. And no one really, especially on the SAT, can read to you. So don't make it a chore. Do one passage one night at a time. And this was an example of one that happened to be literature-based. We'll keep giving you some opportunities for this SAT prep once a week. And then you can do the work on your own and then spend time correcting it on Monday. But I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for listening. I should have mentioned to you that at the end of this particular presentation, you will find the explanations of the result those. Thank you again. Those answers that I happen to go over can certainly come with you just a little while right with you ago. So if anything didn't really